Hi, everybody. Uh, Welcome to my webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about studying abroad. First off, to introduce myself, my name is Dylan. I'm obviously a vet student, as you can tell. Welcome to my webinar. Today, as you can tell, sorry about that. As you can tell from all these skeletons around me, I study at the Royal Veterinary College here in London. And today we're going to be, obviously I'm not from the UK, so today we're going to be talking about my experiences in the past year studying abroad. And I'm going to be going through some different tips. So I'm going to start off first off with an introduction about myself, who I am, what really brought me to the RVC. And then I'm going to be going over just some tips of before you even move over. So before you start school abroad, some things to go through. And then things to do in your first weeks, really the most important things. That includes bank accounts, cell phones, stuff like that. And then I'm going to be talking about a few different things of ways to really make the most about your time abroad. So that includes living student accommodation or finding your own flat, different things like transport tips, how to really be a tourist in your own city. So for me, I'm going to start off first about myself. So as I mentioned, my name's Dylan. I'm in the BVet Med course at the RVC, the Royal Veterinary College in London. This is my second year on the course, so I'm in BVet Med 3, which is year 3. However, last year I did 2 years in 1, so that's the accelerated graduate course. What this means is I already have a bachelor's degree. I have a BSc in environmental and agricultural science. That was a major in life science and a specialization in wildlife biology. So you can tell right from the get-go that I love animals, and this is something I've always wanted to do. But what brought me to that point? So I've grown up in Montreal my entire life. I've lived at home until I moved abroad last year. And vet school was always the goal. It was always what I wanted to do. It was the dream, and I'm living it right now, really. But getting here was a bit of a rocky road. For those who aren't familiar, in Canada, there are only, I believe, 6 or 7 vet schools. They are province specific, meaning that being from Montreal, Quebec, which is the French province, my only choice for vet school was in French. I speak French. I don't have a choice growing up in Montreal. However, my French is definitely not good enough for 5 years of vet school. I found that out the hard way. So the school in Quebec or in Montreal is Université de Montréal, and its campus is in Saint-Hyacinthe. So out of CEGEP, which is our pre-university course, I applied to the vet school in Montreal. Part of the application process was to take a French test. You needed an 80 on the French test to show that you're competent and that you can study in French in veterinary medicine. I received a 79. So unfortunately, right off the bat, I got an email saying that I was rejected based on my French score. A little bit later, I then got another email saying that I was rejected based on my application. So the same school rejected me twice. That was hard because, I mean, as I said, vet school was the dream, and right then and there, the only one that I could really apply to, I got shut down from twice. So I had a few backup plans. And one of those was to go to McGill University. So again, in Montreal, where I could live at home, save some money, get my first degree, my bachelor's degree. So that's what I did. So as I said, I did a major in life science. And then throughout the 3-year course, I then focused on wildlife biology. This gave me opportunities to do research, both statistical research on the computer, as well as actual field work. This brought me to Yellowstone National Park in the United States. I took a desert ecology course where we just camped around Arizona and California. I even got to go up to the Yukon, so Northwest Canada for the summer, so 2.5 months, where I got to do research on snowshoe hares, lynx, and red squirrels. So for me, I got rejected from vet school, yeah, and it sucked at the time. However, it really opened up a few different doors that I ended up absolutely loving. So I did my BSc, got through that, and then in my final year, it was time to apply to vet schools. Again, I considered Université de Montréal, but I knew that having not taken a French course in the past 3 years, if anything, I would have scored lower than I did the first time around. And I accepted the fact that it wasn't doable for me. So I looked around in Canada, and Guelph University has a great school. It's ranked really high. However, the problem with Guelph for me was that I needed to be an Ontario resident. What this meant was I would need to move to Ontario for a year to gain residency. And to do that, I couldn't be a student, which meant I couldn't go do a master's degree, couldn't do higher education. I needed to find a job and then work for the year, apply after that first year for the next year, which means I'd be wasting 2 years to get just into vet school. This didn't guarantee me a place in vet school, and Guelph is a 5-year course. That would have meant it would have taken me 7 years to become a vet after the 3 years I already did in school. It seemed like a lot of work for me. So then I started to look other places. Anywhere else in Canada would have been the same idea as well, just putting that out there. So I looked at the States. Prices in the States are expensive. For American students would know this. If you're studying in-state versus out-of-state, it's a huge difference. So being an international student, the price was definitely something that I was looking at. When I was looking at schools in the States and looking at the prices, I then started to look abroad and realized that no matter where I went, prices would be pretty similar. So in my mind, it was why would I move to the States when I have that opportunity to really expand my horizons? So then I started looking at schools in the United Kingdom. And this really got me excited. So obviously I applied to the RBC because I'm here today. So I applied to the RBC, I applied to University of Edinburgh, I applied to University of Glasgow. Edinburgh and the RBC both have that 4-year course. So the accelerated course where because you already have a bachelor's degree in your first year, you got to do 2 years in one, and it shortens the course a little bit. Glasgow did not, it was a 5-year course. However, that was a backup choice for me, knowing that if I couldn't get into the accelerated ones, I would at least have a 5-year course as a backup. So part of the application process was the interviews. And this is one thing you need to keep in mind when studying abroad is where will my interviews be held? Most vet schools, at least ones that are abroad, don't come to Canada. With staff at the RBC, and they are looking to change this in the future. But for me last year, I had to travel to New York City for my interviews. So right there, that's another cost you got to look at. The application process is costly, and then traveling to another city for the day or 2 days for the interview is an added cost on that. But did my interviews, got into all 3 schools, and London, I mean, I thought I'd be pretty stupid to turn down this opportunity. So here I am, year 2 at the RBC in London. I've absolutely loved the past year. I've had one of the best years of my life, and I really think I've made the most of it. And that's why I'm here today to talk to you about studying abroad and the ways that you guys can make the most of it. A lot of people watching this will be prospective students looking to study in the UK. A lot of what I'm saying, though, can be applied to moving away, even if it's in the same country. Of course, there's certain things, visas, bank accounts, those aren't necessary if you're studying within your country, or cell phones. You don't need to look into that type of stuff, but meeting people, where you'll be living, how to really make the most of it, these are all really important things no matter where you're studying, even if it is in your hometown. So just to start things off, I'm going to talk about a few things that you need to really think about before you move over. So step 1 is choosing the right school. If you will be studying abroad, most likely you'll be spending a lot of money, and you don't want to just be wasting this money. So it is really important that you choose the right school. There's many ways to go about this. Looking at prospectus, those are really important so you know the way they teach and if it applies to what you want to do. Researching the city as well is really important. And I mean, visiting the school and visiting the city itself is really, I think, the best tip I can give you. This is not something I did. I think I got really lucky because RBC is a perfect fit for me. However, other people I've spoken to really had a school in mind. They said, I've always wanted to go to this school since I was really young. And then they visited the school on one of the open days and spoke to a few students, walked around the campus, and made the decision at the end of the day that that school was really not for them. Either the way it was taught, the location of the campuses, just the feel in general. And going to open days is really important. They also have offer days. So once you get your offer, it's another great opportunity. So I really suggest going to those. Something else that's important to think of is, are you going to be studying in a different language? I have a lot of friends here who English is a second language to them, and you need to understand veterinary medicine or human medicine, dentistry, psychology. It applies to all of them. They're all really tough courses. And if you're going to be studying a really tough course, you need to make sure that you can do it. And looking at me back home, I obviously couldn't study in French. So that's why I chose not to go there, even though it is my second language. So that's definitely something to keep in consideration. The next point I'm going to bring up is getting your visa. This is something that's really important and something you need to do in advance. Excuse me. The visa process is dependent on where you're going, obviously. So I can talk about my experience coming to the UK. It takes a while. It's not super quick. You do rely on some things coming through from the school before you can get it. You need to be in the country. So for me, I had to drive to Ottawa for the day to go have my fingerprints and photo taken for my visa, my student visa. So these are all things to take into account. Again, there is a cost associated with that. Now you're about to come over, you're buying yourself your plane ticket. A tip I suggest is looking into return tickets. Of course, you're coming here, you're coming to live here, but getting a return ticket so that you can get that return ticket for over Christmas. So if you know you're coming home at one of the holidays, it could easily be cheaper to get that return ticket. So that's something to keep into mind. Again, you're moving your entire life. Keep in mind the amount of bags you're going to need and how you're going to be getting from the airport to and from the airport to your accommodation. I moved over with 2 huge bags and 2 backpacks. I got really lucky and I had somebody meet me at the airport. That's a service that the RBC offers for international students. So I had somebody meet me at the airport, and it really took away that stress of knowing where I need to go, and I got help with my bags, which was always a bonus there. I have a lot of friends who have sent stuff over from home, so they came over with their bags, but then again, sent things in boxes. And this is something you need to look into further because custom charges are different depending on where you're coming from and going. And some people sent over some things that they could have easily bought here for pretty cheap, and the customs costs were way more than any of the items are worth in the box. So those are something that you should take into account. Also think about when you're going home. If, for example, for me, from being from Canada, moving over here, if I was going home in the winter of my first year, there was no real need for me to be bringing a winter coat with me. It was something else that's big and bulky that I'd be bringing over one way and then just have to bring back the other way. Take these things into consideration when you're moving over. And then the last point about things to do before you come here is if you want to bring your pets. I have a lot of friends who have either did this last year or did it this year, or at least attempted to. Depending on where you're coming from and where you're going, it's really important that you look up the regulations. You'd think being a vet student, we'd know all about it, but there are some pretty strict regulations, especially coming into the UK. UK is rabies free, so you need to have your pets vaccinated a certain period before they come over. So there's a number of vaccinations. You also need to look about how you're actually going to be getting your pet here. So there's a lot of different courier services that help with this. These are just things to think about. Some people have planned this too last minute and had to leave their pets at home. So first off, congratulations, you got into school, you're moving abroad, you step foot off the plane, you're in your new home. Now what do? First thing I could say is relax, because those first few weeks when you move over, you have time to settle in. You don't start school the next day. If you're coming over early, there's certain things you need to take into account. But the 2 biggest things that you need to get done is your bank account and your phone. And this is something that I thought I could do quite easily, and I was proven wrong right away. I came over alone. I told my parents that I can handle everything and I want them to come over over winter break so we could actually enjoy the city and not just be running around buying me things. Thinking back, maybe I should have not said that. I thought on day one I'd walk up to a phone carrier and I'd get a phone and a phone plan. I'd walk up to a bank and I'd get my bank account set up, and then I'd go to any store and I'd buy my sheets, my duvet, and things like that. It was a lot harder than that. So day one, I walked up, I went to a bank. Turns out you need an appointment to meet somebody at the bank to set up an account. Okay, I figured I'll get an appointment later that day. Turns out with so many international students moving to London, obviously there's a lot of schools here, I could only get an appointment 2 weeks later. So, okay, it's not the end of the world. I came over with some cash. I was prepared for that. However, I then went to go try and get a cell phone. Walked into three. So I did my research beforehand, which is something I'd suggest. You do your research, you find out what provider you want. I chose three because I can still use my phone throughout most of Europe. It works in the United States and quite a few countries. So I walk into three thinking, great, get myself a phone, at least all of that. Can't get a phone until you have a bank account. So something else to take into account. Let's jump 2 weeks forward. Finally, at my bank meeting, got my bank account set up, walked back into three right after thinking, got my bank account, I can now get a phone. Turns out you actually need your card to get a phone. Banks in the UK send your card a week after your initial setup, so I had to wait a week. They also set up your PIN for you, which means that I had to wait another week after I got my card until my PIN came. So I was almost phoneless for almost a month. This is my story. A lot of people came over and were with certain carriers that worked here, had a phone that was unlocked or was able to use here, and they had no issues. There's also some banks that have branches here where I have some friends that had no issues. But I will say getting a bank account is probably the most stressful thing you will be doing in those first couple of weeks. And it's great to think ahead. If you know what bank you want to go with, definitely that's a bonus. Call ahead, call branches, see if you can set up an appointment for when you arrive. I arrived a few days before our international welcome week started. I was staying in student accommodation, so that was all set up for me. I've spoken to some friends recently, though, about their experience moving over, and some of them had their own flat when they came over. And they had quite a few issues getting this done. So to rent a flat, at least in London, you need a form from the school saying that you're a student, and the school only gives out this form on enrollment day, meaning that any of my friends who came a month in advance were struggling to find a place to live because I didn't have this form. They were going from hostel to hostel, Airbnb to Airbnb, or some of them were fortunate enough to have their spouse's work pay for a hotel or put them up in a hotel for a week or two. However, these are all things to take into account. And then, as I said, when you first get here, you have that welcome week. You have an international welcome week, at least at the RBC we do, where you get that opportunity to see parts of the city and to meet some cool international students that are going to be studying with you for the next couple of years. Excuse me. So when you move over and you're with these international students for the entire week, you really start to chat with people. You meet some friends. They could either be your flatmates, they can just be people in your building or in your course as a whole. But something I'd suggest to keep in mind is don't get stuck in the international bubble. I know quite a few people who have done this where they've met people they're from the States, they've met people from the States, and that's who they hang out with, that's who they've been hanging out with. Make local friends, wait that extra week when the UK students arrive, and keep that in mind that the best way to experience a new country is to hang out with locals. Of course, London is really diverse and there's not many people originally from London, but I'm talking about UK students in general. So speaking to some of the local students in that second week is a great way of making the most later on. Back on the topic of first moving here, a little bit about when I first arrived. So I've already mentioned getting the bank account and getting a phone. but there's a lot more that you don't think of needing until you're here. For example, well, bedding. I arrived with a sleeping bag, knowing that if I had a hard time my first day, at least I can sleep in my sleeping bag. Fortunately, and I'm proud of myself for this, I was able to go get a duvet and some bedding on my first day. So I was settled in that sort of thing. Something else, towels. You don't think about this. Hand towels, shower towels, at least flying overseas. And for me, I like to shower afterwards. It's a long flight. So little things like that you don't think about that you do need to get out and get right away. Another funny one is toilet paper, toilet roll. Especially if you have an ensuite room, this is something that you're going to need. So it is helpful to make a list of things like this before you arrive. Now I'm going to talk a bit about student accommodation versus finding your own flat. So for me, I chose to live in student accommodation. So I lived at one of the RBC accommodations. Again, this was my first time moving away, first time moving out. I've spent some time on different trips, so I have been around the world, and I've lived on my own a little bit, but not to this extent. So that's why I chose student accommodation, at least for my first year. It was a great way of meeting people. So I lived with 6 girls. So there were some struggles in that in its own, but we all had a great time. But they were all in my year. So we all had struggles together, but then at the same time, we all celebrated together at the end of exams and things like that. And I lived with 3 students from the United States and then 3 from the UK. So right there, it was a great way of meeting other international students as well as other local British students. I moved over on, I believe it was September 14th, and my birthday is the 23rd. And I knew I was moving to a new city, meeting new people, and I thought to myself, if I go out with 2, 3 people on my birthday, I'll be happy. It'll be nice to just see the city, go to a pub. And it was just over a week and a half of being in the UK, or a week actually, doing some math here, week and a half, let's go with that. So yeah, coming over, and we ended up being 20, 30 people that came out for my birthday, and that was great knowing that right when you arrive, everybody's in the same position, and if you want to go out with people, everybody's trying to make friends, so don't feel like those first couple of weeks you're going to be sitting on your own. Everybody's in that same boat. Other things about student accommodation versus finding your own flat. So I've mentioned that you need to get those forms from the school. If you plan on coming early, it is worth speaking with the school in advance to see if you can get those forms. I know at the RBC it is a little tough. I'm not too sure about other schools. Also, some of my friends are now living with people they met at open days. So earlier on in the talk, I spoke about going to open days. It's a great way of meeting people, and they all met each other at the open day, and they live in a student accommodation and actually requested to be with each other. So it's a great way of meeting people in advance and kind of knowing who you're going to be living with. If you're going to be getting your own flat or your own accommodation, something you need to look into is council tax. I'm speaking from my own experience in the UK, so different places will be different. However, council tax is something that we're exempt from as being students. But again, this is something that you need to get a written letter from the school. So your landlord may be asking for it. It's something that you need to take into account. So that's the council fees. And then also there's other ways of finding accommodation, especially through the schools. Schools have a great support system for people. University of London, I know, is a huge housing fair during their Freshers Week. And you can always just email the school in advance, email admissions, and ask if they can put you in touch with anybody who could help you find accommodation. So we've spoken about what to do before you get here. Now that you've arrived, what are the first things you need to do? Now I'm just going to talk about a bit about some of the different struggles and things to consider as you're going through your time studying abroad. One thing that's really, I think it's on everybody's mind when they move away is, how do I speak to my family and friends? For me, it's a 5-hour time difference. This is difficult depending on when I want to speak with friends and family. If I want to talk to my family after they get home from work, it's usually quite late at night for me. So this causes some issues from time to time. It means I need to stay up later. So these are all things to take into account. I know some people who set up weekly meetings with their friends or family and say, on this day at this time, we're always going to chat. And under whatever circumstances, if they can't, they let each other know. I tell some of my friends to just call me whenever. And if I can answer, I answer. And if I can't, I can't. So that's just something to kind of set up with your family or friends beforehand. Another thing that could be an issue is getting around the cities, transport. One thing I tell everybody who's coming to London is to stop using Google Maps and to download City Mapper. City Mapper is an amazing app for getting around big cities. I definitely use it in London all the time. It can tell you anything from where to walk, where you're going, bus times, tube times, train times, everything like that. So depending on what city you're moving to, City Mapper is a great option. Also, take advantage of student travel cards. So in London, we use an Oyster card. In your first week, this is definitely something that you can ask around about, but take advantage of the student discounts you can get. So there's a student Oyster card and a student rail card that I have here in London, and it does save me quite a bit on my travel because traveling is expensive in some of these cities. Transport is not cheap. Also, some things to take into account. Living in London, you don't need a car. You're kind of nuts if you're driving around this city, especially for me being on the other side of the road. However, at our second campus in Potter's Bar, it is useful to get a car when you're doing placements later on. So this is something else to budget for and just think about. Also look into driving license. As a Canadian citizen, part of the Commonwealth, my driving license just transfers over, which is great for me. I know a lot of US students, however, have to take driving tests. So just keep in mind that this is something you're going to do. And I said you can't really drive in London, but a lot of people bike. So if you're an avid biker, bring over your helmet, bring over your safety vest. Think about things like this. So I've spoken now a bit about getting around the city. So now, what about things to do in the city? How to make the most about it? One thing I will say is don't be afraid to be a tourist in your own city. This is something I did before I came to the RBC, before I moved over to London. Is in my last couple of weeks in Montreal, I really just did all the top 10 touristy things on the list because I wasn't going to be living there anymore. So it's something to be doing beforehand is in the city, your home, where you're living now, do some of those touristy things you've never done. And then when you move over to wherever you're moving, again, do those touristy things, but take it easy. You don't feel like you need to crush everything into a week or two. You have time to, obviously I'm here for 4 years, so I have time to check out all the museums and really see the city. Also, you're gonna have friends and family visit you. It's bound to happen. So always remember that you can see things with them, but immerse yourself in the culture. Pick up some of the slang words. I see I've been saying flat this whole time and flatmates. That's not a Canadian saying at all. We say roommate. So just obviously don't be walking around and throwing out some slang in your first week here, but realize that you will be picking up on some slang. One of the biggest pieces of advice that I can give to people is to just walk around your city, get lost. Obviously don't do this at night. Some of these cities are quite dangerous, but just walk down little streets, and as long as you have City Mapper, you'll know where you're going. But yeah, just enjoy it. There's no rush, and don't feel like you need to do everything all at once. A little bit about my experiences. So on my first day, I've already spoken about the bank account, spoken about the phone issues I had, got my duvet, which was great. And then that first night I went to my first concert in London, and I was exhausted. I arrived at 7 in the morning and the show started at 8 p.m. But it was unbelievable to be standing in a beautiful venue in the middle of Camden and to be listening to a British singer, and it all really just hit me then and there, and that this is my life now. I'm living in London, and it's going to be not just hitting you on that first day, it's going to hit you all the time. And I've been here for over a year now, and it's still, I'll be walking down the street and I'll see something going on and it'll remind me like, yep, this is my life now, and prepare yourself that that's always going to be happening. Obviously student budgets, we're always on a budget. Look up for free things. There's a lot of different blogs in all of these cities that you could be following on social media, and they'll always let you know when there's free things going on, different festivals, whether it be food festivals, music festivals, other cultural things. There's always a lot going on. One thing I love about London is how cultural it is. So there's always different festivals going on depending on the different cultures. For example, Canada Day, Trafalgar Square, there's always a big parade and a big festival going on. And on that point, it's great to have little things that remind you of home, because everybody gets homesick. It's something that you can think that, oh, it's not going to happen to me, but it will. And you need those little things to remind you of home. And one example I can think of is I went to a concert one night, and it was two singer-songwriters from Canada. And one of their songs actually brought up a few different provinces and cities in Canada. And it was nice to sit there and listen to it. And it brought back some memories of home. And sometimes you need that. Being a Canadian student at the RBC, there's not many of us. There are quite a few coming in this new year, and I know quite a few have applied for the next year. However, in my class, I think we're maybe 4 or 5 Canadians, so you don't always have that chance to be chatting with people about home. You may not be from the same city as them, so it's really important to have those connections to home, because they help relieve that homesickness. Couple other things. So I've said make the most of it. I've really done that in London. I have a bit of a problem going to concerts. I go to quite a few, and whether it be med school, veterinary medicine, dentistry, psychology, they're tough courses. And the last thing you want to do is move abroad, move to an amazing city, and then sit in your room studying all day, or sit in the library studying all day. So for me, my way of dealing with the stress of school was to be going to concerts and kind of forgetting about school when I'm at these venues. But same could be said for plays. Being in London, obviously, there's quite a bit of plays and musicals going on. Theater is really big here. So that's been great for me as well. And then tons of museums. All these cities have museums. Take afternoons off. Don't be studying all the time. Take that time to explore the city. So I've now spoken about what to do before you get here, what to do when you first arrive, spoken about where to live, some things to do in your city. How else can you be making friends, though? That's what I'm going to be talking about next. So I'm going to be talking about the RBC specifically. However, a lot of different schools have different programs similar to this. So joining a sports team is an amazing way of meeting people, having a bit of a support group, having something to do in your off time. However, some of these sports teams can be quite time demanding. It may not be for you. Some people just don't play sports. I'm not huge on team sports. So for me, when I found out there was a mountaineering club, that's what I joined. And we go rock climbing. I was rock climbing earlier today. And it's a great way of socializing with people, both international and local students. And you can meet other people through these clubs, these sports teams. For mountaineering, it was a great way of me seeing different parts of the UK that I wouldn't have seen otherwise. So we've gone on quite a few trips over the past year. I was in Wales climbing Snowdonia, the tallest mountain in Wales. I was in the Peak District, which is another region in the UK. So it's a great way of seeing parts of the country where they'll drive you. You just have to pay your subscription fees. So for us, it was £25 a trip, and then £25 for your insurance fees to cover that. And they drive and cook for you and set up the huts and everything. And I'm so happy that I joined mountaineering last year and that I went on a few of these trips. One thing to keep in mind is it's the UK. Drinking is pretty big here. There is a drinking culture. Definitely, it shocked me at the start. Not everybody's a drinker, though. And schools definitely tailor to this. First off, in freshers, there's the freshers week or 2 weeks before you start. Of course, there are a lot of drinking events, but there's also a lot of non-drinking events. This year, for example, there was a bowling night, there was a theater night, and all the drinking events you can also go to and be sober. So if you're not somebody who drinks, don't feel pressured into it. A few other things you can be doing around school if you're not into sports. Here at the RBC, we have an anatomy club. So all schools in the UK get Wednesday afternoons off. meaning that Wednesday afternoons is when you can join clubs, societies, or work on your own time. One thing I suggest, though, is Wednesday afternoons is your time to forget about school. It's your time to have some fun and relax, really. So there's many different clubs. There's board game clubs you can be joining. There's poetry and dance, arts clubs. So if you're not into sports, there's tons of different options. Something else that I've gotten involved in is the student union. And again, this is another way of getting a great support network, meeting great people, and really getting involved in the school. So last year I was the course rep for my year, and that's a way of meeting different staff members. And again, a lot of the staff members, especially at the RBC, are international. So it's a good way of meeting other international people, and then also forwarding stuff back to the school, back to the students, so meeting other students in your year. Now I'm the environment rep for the student union at the RBC. So there's quite a few different things that we have going on this year, and it's just a way of getting involved. Something that is probably on a lot of people's minds when they're moving over is, can I work during my degree? I am. This is something that you need to look into once you get your student visa. Student visas all have different regulations depending on your degree, and all of them related to working. So, for example, at the RV or in London or in the UK, I could be working 20 hours a week during term time. So that includes all the time I should be in school. So 20 hours a week, which I think is more than enough because school is your #1 priority. So a few jobs that I've had is a dog sitter. So that gives me opportunity to live in beautiful flats around the city, definitely get my dog fix or cat fix, which is great because I miss my pets at home. So it's a great way of substituting that. And of course, I've used them to study a little bit, to do some physical exams and things like that. So it's got a little bit of a school benefit as well. I've also worked for the school as a student ambassador, and the types of events you'd work is open days and things like that, giving tours to other prospective students, recruiting students, stuff like that. And it's a good way to making money on the side. So all schools have student ambassadors. It's something you should take into account. A few other things to bring up as we're running out of time here is other ways to see parts of the country you're living in. So in vet school in particular, we have what's called EMS placements. There's preclinical and clinical placements. The preclinical, so in the UK, the regulations are you have to do 12 weeks of preclinical placements. So this doesn't involve going to a veterinary practice. This involves 2 weeks on a dairy farm. At least these are the RBC's regulations. 2 weeks on a dairy farm, 2 weeks on a pig farm, 2 weeks at a horse stable, and then 2 weeks lambing. So if you're looking to see different parts of the country, this is a great way to do it. For example, I went up to Carlisle, which is northern England, just below the Scottish border, to go do my lambing. And it was a great way of seeing a beautiful part of the country that I wouldn't have been to otherwise. Then there's also EMS placement. So when you're actually doing your clinical rotations for your last year and a half. Of course, you got to take cost into effect, but it's another great way of seeing different parts of the city, or parts of the country, sorry. So for example, I'm going to be going to Isle of Man this summer for a 3-week placement at a mixed veterinary practice. Isle of Man, I've never heard of before this year. I'm sure a lot of you haven't either. It's not really the biggest tourist destination. So going to do a placement there, I'll have accommodation sorted, and I'll be working a lot of the time, of course, but it'll give me an opportunity to see parts of the country that I wouldn't see otherwise, and it's not something you think about if you're becoming on vacation. And then again, other things to take into account when you're doing some of these placements is it's a great way of getting home. So speaking to your vets at home, of course there's regulations or there's rules on the amount of weeks you could be doing abroad, but it's a great way of getting back to wherever home is and seeing your friends and family while at the same time knocking out a couple of these weeks. So I know a lot of people who throughout the summer went home and did a lot of their preclinical or clinical weeks. A few other things to bring up. Making the most of where you're living. Coming from Canada over to the UK, I'm next door to Europe, and last year was quite tough for me, so I don't think I took advantage of that as much as I should have, but definitely am already this year. And plan weekend trips. go to places that are a little bit off the beaten path that people wouldn't think of going all the way from America, coming over to Europe to see, because in 3 days you can easily see a city that's quite close by for quite cheap. Other ways to travel and to make the most of it while you're studying. So at least in the veterinary profession or veterinary school, we have what's called the IVSA, the International Veterinary Students Association. And this is a global association of veterinary students around the world. So they hold congresses and different symposiums for people to network and meet each other, but they also hold exchanges. So this summer I went to Thailand on a week exchange to see one of their vet schools, and I was shown around by a bunch of Thai vet students, traveled around the entire country and got to see a couple different vet schools and see how they learn veterinary medicine over in Thailand. So this was a great way of me traveling and getting abroad while still focusing on school. And then here at the RVC, we just had our own huge IVSA event where we had just under 50 vet students from around the world. So that included 12 different countries come visit us for the week. And we brought them all around London, did practicals with them. And then coming up in the new year, we're going to be sending 30 students to 3 different countries, so 10 in each, to on a bit of an exchange, so to then go see how they learn veterinary medicine. So again, I'll be going to Germany on one of these trips. So it's a great way of getting out of the city, getting abroad while still being school focused. So that's really the majority of the things I wanted to talk about today. So again, just to recap it all, I've spoken about myself. How did I get here? How did I get to the UK? I had some unfortunate circumstances. I got rejected from my school at home, but I didn't let that stop me. I found another way in, and that required me moving abroad. I spoke about a bunch of the things to do when you are moving abroad. So things to do before you move included getting your visa sorted, looking into your bank account and phone and doing a bit of research like that. Thinking about what you're going to be bringing as well. I then spoke about what to do once you step off that plane and the struggles of getting a bank account, getting your phone set up, getting those things that you didn't really think about needing that you do need in your flat. And that brought up my next point about where you'll be living, student accommodation, or are you going to be getting your own flat? And these are things to think about before you move over, but it's definitely something that obviously affects you once you move to a new country. Spoke a little bit about speaking with your family and friends, so different ways of going about that. And then I spoke about different tips related to transport. So again, just to mention, I think the most important one is City Mapper, especially in London. It's a great app and it gets you around, taking advantage of student discounts on transport. And then the next point was not to be afraid to be a tourist. Being a tourist in your new home is a great way of seeing it. And I'm here for 4 years, and I don't think I'll ever not be a tourist. I love going to the museums. I love just walking around the city and making the most of it. But you got to remember at the same time, if it's raining out, if it's not a nice day, and don't feel pressured to go to a park or to go to the zoo, because you have time to do these things. You're here for a while. I spoke about the different ways of meeting people at these schools. It can be quite daunting moving to a new country all on your own, but you need to remember that everybody is in the same boat. Very few people are going to be living at home while they're studying at these specialist schools. So joining clubs, sports teams, or the student union, these are all different ways of meeting new people, getting that support group that you're going to need. I then spoke about jobs. So it is possible. I've done it. I've worked over the past year and a half. I know quite a few people who have worked in cafes and things like that. So it's definitely something that can be done, but you need to look into your visa and what you're allowed to be working. And then spoke about placements and how you can make the most of this and see parts of your new home that you wouldn't otherwise see, while at the same time getting some of your school things accomplished. And then I finished up with going on weekend trips, really taking advantage of what's around you, and then other ways of getting involved in seeing different parts of the world while you're studying abroad, while keeping school a priority. So I'm going to be taking some questions now, if I can figure out how to do this. Yeah, so I hope you all enjoyed that. And let's see if I can get some questions up. Please bear with me while I do this. How is this done? Here we go. Okay, so reading just through some of your comments. It's mostly people. Oh, here's one. What has been your favorite thing about studying in the UK so far? Ooh, it's a good question. Favorite thing about studying in the UK? I'd have to go with, I already said I have a bit of a concert problem, and I love studying, I love going to concerts, and I think my favorite part about studying in the UK is that all of my favorite bands come to London. It's a bit of a problem, really, because a lot of my money goes to that, but having so many musical acts come here that I've always wanted to see, and like I said earlier on, that it's a way of relieving stress for myself, so that's great. So I would say that's probably my favorite part about being in the UK. Scrolling through, what weekend trips would you recommend from London? Ooh, one that I went on recently, which I loved, was I went east to the east coast of England to go see seals. I had no clue that there were seals in the UK, but there are. So it was about a 2-hour drive, 2-hour drive east, and we went just outside of Norwich. And there is a huge, it's the UK's largest seal population there, and we were allowed to walk along the beach and from a viewing point see seals, and a lot of them had pups within that first week, and obviously loving animals, I thought that was great. So that was probably one of my favorite weekend trips I've done so far. I'm going to be going to Poland next week for the weekend. I'm going to be going to Warsaw. I've got a trip to Budapest coming up. Just got back from Prague, so I've really made the most of that. What skills have you picked up since living on your own? Definitely cooking. That's an important one. I know a lot of people who get takeaways a lot. They haven't really adjusted to that, but I love to eat and love to cook. So this was something I kind of practiced a bit beforehand with my sister and some friends, and I think cooking for myself has been pretty great. So that's definitely a skill, and navigating around everywhere is also another one. I think I was pretty poor at this before. A lot of my friends would say so, but I think now being on my own in a brand new city over the past year, I've definitely gotten better at making my way around places and learning about where I'm going. So let's see if there's any more questions. Oh, I've got Eve making fun of me, asking me to say Norwich again. Norwich. Something about moving abroad is you're going to pronounce everything wrong, and you're going to get laughed at for that. Yeah, one more question got here. Which placement was your favorite so far? And that's a tough one. And I think this is one that's actually shared by most of vet students. I would say that lambing has been my favorite so far. It's tough. It's definitely a tough thing. I've never really, heard of lambing. I know that sheep have lambs, but in Canada, it wasn't something I was exposed to, and it is a huge industry in the UK. So coming over, obviously, it's something that I had to do. I worked 14 days straight, 14-hour days. You woke up at 6:30 a.m. Yeah, you went to bed pretty late after your nightly checks, and they were long, hard days, but would I go back 100%? There's a real sense of accomplishment walking away from some of those farms and knowing that you really did a great job. So I believe that's all the questions for now. People can always contact me on the Medic Mentor website. I should be up there, so you can always contact me if you have any other questions, or email Medic Mentor and they'll pass it on. I hope you've enjoyed yourself, and thanks to all those, again, thank you to all those who logged in for the entire talk, or those who are logging in and listening to me in the future. So thanks a lot, and have a good day.